Hi, I'm Randy Reid, Executive Director of the National Lighting Bureau, and we're broadcasting from the studio of one of our sponsors, the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers in Washington, D.C. We're here for the 9th Annual Lighting Forum, and I am joined by Peter Brown of Lighting Transitions, Wesley Whited of DNV Energy Services, and Deana Haynes of Chargepoint. The name of this panel is titled Current State of Electrification in the USA. Welcome.
Thank you.
Welcome. Glad to be here.
Well, thank you for joining me. And Peter, the first question goes to you. You forwarded an article to me by Jeff St. John of Canary Media. In his article, he says that the Northeast highways will require sports-like stadium levels of grid power by 2030. Why?
Primarily for highway transport, trucks, large vehicles. They want to be able to charge in 30 or 45 minutes, which means what's called a level 3 charging unit, which requires anywhere from 200 to 350 kW demand per charging unit. And so when you add that up for multiple units, the amount of power required from an infrastructure standpoint, not so much kWh, but just kW demand that the utility has to run to there, plus their 480 volt. So there's a lot of infrastructure needs to be put in there, and when you've got more and more trucks, which seems to be the direction it's going, that'll be electric, it's a lot of power.
So we're primarily interested in lighting in our industry at the National Lighting Bureau, but we are seeing more and more interest in EV charging. Many of the lighting maintenance contractors are now installing these EV chargers. Here's the question. When they're doing a lighting job, they calculate the lighting. There are certain codes that they've got to go by for the calculations, and they do it. And there's really not much thought as to whether or not the grid can support the power for one building. Do EV charging companies need to really work close with the utilities to ensure that there is power? Especially
if they're looking at fleet systems where you've got dozens and maybe hundreds of vehicles that you're going to have charged. And so that's a lot of power in one place. And the more the utility knows what's coming, because it may take them months to provide enough power to that specific site. So the other part is primarily just in office buildings where there's going to be parking and there's going to be EV charging units in place. There may or may not be enough power in the building to support that. And so now you've got to look at putting power in or potentially doing what we call deep dive retrofits, where you're able to take power out of the building using lighting controls integrated with HVAC and so on, that can reduce the amount of load in the building to offset what's coming in.
Sure. Okay. This question will go to you, Wes. What is an EV forward state?
I would describe an EV forward state right now as Illinois. They've just passed some recent legislation in 2021 called CEJA. And the CEJA legislation is going to allow the electric utilities to begin to provide both the infrastructure upgrades to our electrical systems that are needed, while also providing equitable rebates to all Illinoisans so that they can begin to adopt the foundational technology.
Okay, so rebates to Illinois residents to buy EV cars?
Yes, there'll be rebates to buy EVs, and then there will be subsidies and tax credits to the utilities themselves so that they can begin to fundamentally change the fuel supply of the power system. So as we talk about electrification here, we got to remember that we are in a moment of a climate crisis. And so the reason why we are electrifying our grid is because we can provide that grid with clean, renewable energy.
Okay. Now you say all of that, and you talk about maybe 1 to 2 months to build the infrastructure to get the power to the chargers. What about to generate the power? Do the utilities have the capability of generating the power that is needed? Deana?
I would say that at the current time, yes, there's enough capacity within the grid, but as we look to the future and on really the rapid adoption of electric vehicles and the subsequent demand of EV charging, there will be some changes that are needed to our grid to really support the demand there. And so, you know, one of the stats that I really like to quote is that in 2019, only about 3% of new cars sold were electric vehicles, and as we look to 2026, 3 years from now, it'll be 30% of new cars sold. And so there's a rapid adoption that's coming. And so there will be some changes needed to the grid to support everything.
And I believe this past summer there were some issues in California, and people were told to maybe not charge their cars. And then in Switzerland this week, the country of Switzerland is considering banning electric cars. Were you aware of that?
I was not. That's news to me. I typically focus on efforts in North America, and so didn't get a chance to hear anything about Switzerland.
Sure. And their issue is because of the Ukrainian war, because of them having trouble. They do a lot of hydroelectric, and in the winter they always are short on energy. So they're really against, and you wouldn't think Switzerland would be against the electric car, but right now that's what they're considering. Okay, ChargePoint is the largest, is that correct?
In North America, yes. Okay. Significant market share for EV charging.
And what are some of the challenges you guys see?
Could you clarify challenges with regards to?
With regards to acceptance, with regards to finding locations, and then I'd love to know about the business model of it. Do you have recurring income from this? Are you, every time I charge my hybrid, does ChargePoint get a commission, or are you just doing the infrastructure and someone else is providing and earning that income?
Absolutely, I can answer this. Thanks for clarifying. So this is not a ChargePoint commercial, so I'll talk generally about
Thank you.
The industry at large. So there is more demand than the EV charging industry can support at the moment. There's so many cars coming off the line, and even the automakers themselves are having trouble keeping up with demand for electric vehicles, and so that permeates throughout the broader industry there. The ChargePoint model is one that has both hardware and software, and so there's recurring revenue from the software side, but the hardware purchases are upfront, typically one-time investments. There are a variety of business models out there with regards to EV charging. Some companies do make money off of the charging sessions and off of the electrons that are dispensed. There's, again, a variety of models out there where there's some hardware companies, some software companies, some vertically integrated companies that do all of that. And then some companies that are looking to monetize and really create a private fueling network, sort of like gas stations are, but for electric vehicles. And then some that are considered to be part of the building infrastructure and operate, and their business models akin to a HVAC system or elevators or a security system, and sell their products in that way to those types of properties.
So the gas station, typically they will be earning a profit on the power that they sell, much like they earn a profit on the gasoline that they sell. And then there are some, I understand, not gas stations necessarily, but will maybe just put it as a free service to draw people to their business.
And so yes, in those circumstances, it's not the charging company that would be offering the charging sessions for free, it would be the property owner. So in the same way that a multifamily building might have a pool at their facility as an amenity, that same multifamily building might offer EV charging as built into the rent or for free, effectively, to their residents too.
Okay. Peter, you do a lot of work with utilities. Con Ed is one that I know about. What do the utilities say about EV charging and the supply of power? Are they ready today, and will they be ready in 2030?
I think the overall opinion is that right now they're supplying enough power because the requirement is relatively low. If you look at just whether it's residential homes or commercial parking lots and so on and so forth, there's enough power in the system to be able to run new power to that facility, put in a new meter, and you're good to go. The challenge seems to be as we ramp up, and not only is it EV charging, but there's a push to switch over to electrification for a number of things, including heat pumps. And so when you start to accumulate that amount of load, it starts to go further up the electrical system from transformers up to substations and then back to generation. So in the long run, there's going to be some challenges. That article you mentioned, they were saying because the amount of load required for large truck stops, they're talking about maybe tapping into high voltage transmission lines that are close to the highway to get power, that there's that much power right there that they can tap into versus relying on the local utility to get it. So they're starting to think that way.
In another lifetime, I used to sell a lot of fixtures in the Chicago area, and Con Ed liked them because they were dusk to dawn. And I believe they would give a rebate long before DLC, and they were almost free because they wanted to create night demand to balance out their load. Does the EV charging industry help with night demand, and is that appealing? And do you envision most of it being at night? Most of the charging?
For residential, absolutely. The challenge is during the daytime, because I think one of the ChargePoint presentations talked about a office worker is 20 times more likely to buy an EV if he knows or she knows that they can get charging at work.
20 times more likely?
Yeah. So the challenge now is you're into daytime and your demand, obviously Monday through Friday is when your demand is usually the highest. And so that's where the challenge is going to be to balance all that out. But as far as home, absolutely, it's going to be at night.
Wes, I hear that, historically, we would fill up our car when the car is empty with gas. But your industry wants to kind of rethink that and encourage people, don't wait till the battery is empty. You will just charge throughout the day. So if you're shopping somewhere, you're going to get a quick 10-minute charge. If you're having dinner at a restaurant, you'll get a charge while you're there. You'll charge more frequently and not wait until it's totally empty. Is that your belief? Is that how you see things going?
Yeah, it's an excellent opportunity. It's called opportunity charging. Is a good example
Okay.
of what you talk there. And when Peter talks about us charging our electric cars overnight, that is a good way to balance the grid, but that's also kind of, when we look at the time, that's also when our grid is the dirtiest. So charging at your workplace.
Well, I don't understand. At night, the grid is the dirtiest. What's that mean?
Well, when we think about renewable energy, it's called intermittent for a reason, and that's because it's not coincident with the sun. So if we want to charge our cars with the cleanest energy, it would be charging between maybe 12 and 3 p.m. while we're at work.
Okay. I was not aware of that. But it will be less expensive to charge it at night.
Correct.
So that's why most people would prefer that.
Yeah.
Okay, Deana, what about safety in charging? Are you hearing any issues with safety?
No, I haven't heard any issues with safety in charging a vehicle.
So with my hybrid, if I were to go to a gas station, and a lot of they've got the gas pumps in the front of the station, so they're trying to put the EV chargers wherever they have space, and it could be behind the gas station. If I am plugged in, and if a bad guy comes up with a gun or a baseball bat, and I'm plugged in, I am tethered, right? My vehicle will not start. I cannot leave at all. The only way I can run away is to open my door and unplug the charger, get back in my car, and leave. Right?
So, okay, I initially interpreted your question as safety in terms of the mechanics of the
Right.
technology. You're talking about safety
Crime.
in terms of personal safety. I think that at this point in the country, in the world, EV charging would not be a. Let me see how I can say this. There is no correlation between crime and EV charging, to my knowledge, and I would say that I think that there's consideration that should be made in locations for EV charging and where those stations are placed. Typically, and when we think about NEVI funding, so this is federal funding that's coming out for corridor charging opportunities, there's some pretty strict guidelines on where that charging should be located. So, a mile off the highway, there's got to be well lit circumstances. There need to be facilities available, and so I don't see a direct correlation between crime and EV charging.
Most of the stations I've seen, especially the Tesla ones, there's virtually nobody ever in the car. they're out shopping, they're doing something. So I think the point of somebody being in there for 35 or 45 minutes is, I mean, Walmart's putting in level 3 charging stations, 30, 45-minute charge times, so people will go in the store and shop and come back out. So
Yeah,
I think that's more the case.
And I just want to add that what we typically see is that people charge where they park. And so a lot of EV charging is going into existing parking lots. And so if there was crime that was prevalent prior to EV charging going in, you know, again, I just don't think there's a direct correlation.
It's
there.
a good point, and I've Googled it, and there's not. There's very little crime associated with it today. But I submit it's because the criminals just don't know. And it reminds me of ATMs 30 years ago when they became prevalent. The bad guys would hang out at ATMs. Well, we kind of solved that by putting cameras up, light, and there's minimum, IES has minimum required lighting or recommended practices for ATMs. And I can just see that there is going to be a surge once the criminals find out that you are locked in. You are a sitting duck in that vehicle. And I know that where I get gas on a regular basis, but sometimes I'm traveling, sometimes it's late and I'm running low on fuel, and I'll go into a gas station that may be in an area that I don't quite feel safe. But I do know that if somebody approaches me and I'm sitting in my car, I can run off. But we can't with the EV chargers. So you mentioned that the industry is kind of considering this or is aware of this, because I think we're going to have some sort of charger where you can have a breakaway where you can leave if you need to.
And that's certainly an interesting concept with the breakaway, the same way that it exists in gas stations today. But I'm not the spokesperson for crime,
Sure. But you're not seeing it right now. There's not an issue, and I sure can't find that there's an issue yet.
No, not to my knowledge. Again, I don't think that there's a correlation between crime and EV charging. I'm sure there could be a report out about that, but I don't have that insight.
Let's look at the year 2050. What percent of our automobiles will be electric, in your opinion?
This is a global energy transition outlook. We think by 2033, 50% of all new car sales will be EV, and by 2043, 50% of all the cars on the road will be EV. Those are light-duty vehicles. Things move a little bit slower as we move into medium and heavy duty, where there may be an opportunity for hydrogen fuel cell for some of our long-haul trucking as well. So that is technology, that's kind of capitalism is kind of competing for that market share here in the moment. So it's a little bit more fuzzy, but my firm's out of Norway, which leads the world in EV adoption right now. And so we're very confident in our global sales projection numbers.
Okay.
Yeah, there's about, the stat I saw was fascinating, is there's 280 million registered vehicles in the States. And so 6% of those just go away each year, and 5% are added to that number. And so gradually over time, you're going to see more and more vehicles change over to your point as far as the number of new vehicles being added, but then the number of total vehicles on the road as the old ones start to fall off. So total number of vehicles becomes more relevant.
And just to add to that, so part of the increase in total vehicles is because of the aftermarket, and so EVs will become, available for resale, and as there's new production of, or there's more production of new vehicles, there will also continue to be the previous stock that is resale. There's a used car market for electric vehicles, and they typically take far less maintenance and
fewer parts.
Yeah, and fewer parts, less maintenance, and so we'll likely see EVs on the road for much longer than we do for internal combustion
And then just replace the battery as needed.
Batteries and tires and wiper fluid, basically.
Okay, that's pretty cool to think about. Yeah. Now, California, I think, has a mandate that every new vehicle will be electric by what year?
I believe California is 2030. Some of the other Pacific Northwest states, I want to say, are around 2035. I want to say New York is 2035. I want to say Illinois is maybe 2035 or 2040, but they're all, our most progressive states are clustering somewhere between 2030 and 2040.
Wow. Okay. Closing comments?
Just the fact that everybody's still kind of figuring out the implications of this as far as, okay, as we add more and more load to the grid, how does the grid handle it? Do we need to do a major rebuild, or do we do microgrids? And it's going to be a combination of all of that. And so it's going to be fascinating to watch as we see how this goes along. And I think going back to the lighting part, I think we're going to see an opportunity for controls to be involved in getting as much savings out of the buildings to make that power available. Because we were talking last night, in some parts of the West Coast, new construction for multifamily housing, they're requiring 100% of the parking spaces be plumbed for EV charging.
Wow.
So when
Was
you
not
see,
aware of that.
yeah, so when you get
Great
those,
for ChargePoint and other companies.
so you get those kind of loads being put onto the
Right.
grid, it's going to be interesting.
Yes, and to build on that, some of the cities are Seattle, San Francisco, Vancouver that have 100% EV. They're called EV ready codes, and so cities such as those have specifically outlined a requirement for 100% be EV capable upon completion.
of every parking space
Of every
that's
parking space.
being built.
For multifamily in particular, yes.
Wow. Okay. Closing comments?
From today to 2044, we're going to double the amount of electric that's out there on the grid here in the United States. But we're doing that.
Wait. From today to 2040,
2044.
2044, so over the next 21 years, we're going to double the amount of electrical
Yes.
capability.
And we're doing that because we will also simultaneously have the carbon supply of our energy. So that is the reason why
Okay.
we are electrifying nearly everything. It gets a little bit hard when we move into some of the industrial processes. But to Peter's point, this is only going to be possible when we find a way to basically use customer demand as a battery. And network lighting controls integrated into other building systems is probably one of the most important tools that we have currently in our toolkit today to rapidly begin to integrate that amount of renewable energy onto
You
the
said
grid.
use customer demand as a battery?
More or less, yes.
What's that mean?
That means what we're going to do is to balance out that intermittency. We are going to do things like dim our lights at scale. We are going to control all of our water heaters to act as a giant distributed thermal battery. What we're going to do is we're going to shape, shift, and shimmy our load to fill in. You're laughing because those are utility
Okay.
terms, but we're going
Right.
to shape, shift, and shimmy the utility's load shape
Okay.
to fill in the peaks and the valleys that exist
Okay.
from the intermittent energy. And the reason we need to do this is we're not going to be able to scale long-term duration energy storage until the 2040s or the 2050s. So controlling customer demand is probably the best use case that we have at this very moment.
Okay, I understand that. Okay, guys, this has been very good, very informative for me, and I hope for our audience. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Now we will open the floor, and as we're waiting on our questions, I do want to ask the panelists, this discussion, of course, was done a couple months ago. Has anything really changed since we had that talk?
I think what's starting to happen is the realization of the implications of all of this added load. As Wesley said, by 2044, we're going to double. So what does that mean? And you're starting to see, for example, people starting to think about nuclear, or they're spending a boatload of money on 2 nuclear plants in Illinois to upgrade them to be more productive. Pacific Gas and Electric did a study, and they said, we think we're going to need to upgrade every substation 1 to 2 times a year in the 2030s and 3 to 5 times every year in the 2040s. Because to Wesley's point on when we sat down and talked, is as the existing gas diesel vehicles start to fall off, that's when we're going to start to really see a percentage of increase of EVs in the overall marketplace. And so PG&E is basically saying, here's what we're going to have to do to upgrade the system. And that's going to cost a lot of money. They're even talking about not only passing it on to ratepayers, but figuring out some financing plans to pay for it all. So just in the last 2 months, that seems to have started to bubble up.
Deana, I saw you smiling. I'm not trying to put you on the spot, but do you want to add to that?
Yeah, happy to add to that. I think that some of the numbers that have come out in terms of the growth of EV adoption between 2021 and 2022 demonstrate that adoption is continuing to grow, and I expect that it will accelerate in the future. Between 2021 and 2022, there was a growth rate of about 60% of EVs sold in the U.S. And so just pointing that out in terms of where we're going as a country, where the related industries are going, I think is pretty evident and substantiates a lot of what we said in our interview.
Okay.
And then from my perspective, Peter, I saw this morning where PSE&G also announced that they're looking to kind of revitalize some of their existing nuclear fleets. So that is kind of probably happening nationally. And the trend that I've noticed so far, we're kind of here immature in 2023, is we're not talking about states filing their transportation or utilities filing their transportation electrification plans. They're being filed, they're being put out to RFP. So we're kind of past the planning process at this point in 2023, where it's kind of the year of implementation.
Okay, thank you. So it's interesting. Here is a question that was texted to me on my cell phone. I don't know, maybe the Q&A thing isn't working, but the question is, Peter, you mentioned nuclear. Do you consider nuclear to be green energy? And do you think that the U.S. will ever again embrace nuclear energy?
It's certainly green. As far as productive, meaning available, it's like 90+% of the time. It's fascinating when you look at the percentages of availability. Unfortunately, solar and wind are the least available because they're intermittent. And so you're going to have to put in a boatload of them to replace coal and natural gas, which are about double the productivity level or capacity level. So yeah, I think we'll revisit it, maybe because we have to.
We may be forced into it. Interesting.
Yeah.
During the talk, I mentioned about safety, and before today, I Googled again. I am not able to find of any violence regarding EV charging and being tethered to the vehicle. And I'm just curious if any of you have seen it since our discussion. It appears it's not an issue today.
Yeah, it's not an issue. So the fact that you haven't found anything, I think, is provides evidence of that.
Okay. With California having blackout issues in the summer, isn't this only going to be exacerbated? And aren't people that buy electric cars going to be frustrated in California and perhaps other areas during these blackouts? There's really not a solution to that, is there?
Well, I don't think it's specific to just California. I know, Randy, when we were catching up prior to the event, I live in North Carolina, you live in Tennessee. Extreme cold weather did to our grid kind of what happens into some regions there, in the summer. So there's just ways in terms of reliability. It goes back to that, the best tool that we have today is using that customer demand as a way to balance out that intermittency. And so for terms of us in the South, it's moving away from electric resistant strip heating into highly efficient heat pumps. In California, they move to what they call net peak, which just means the load moves later into the day. It's cycling people's air conditioners by a few degrees. We're going to have to continue to find a way to balance customer load with the EV load. And probably the most important tool in our kit is the rate. If we can sync up or automate the way that the car charges through price signals on the grid, then you will have this economic incentive to not want to plug into your car as the grid is kind of nearing a brownout scenario. And your car or your charger will make those decisions for you based upon you programming in whatever your individual price threshold would be.
Peter, you're the closest person on the panel to the utility industry. And in the talk, you kind of mentioned about having to pay for this new demand. What are they saying? And are the utilities, is the word scared the right word about the future because of this huge demand on the grid?
Yeah, I don't think it's so much scared because we really don't know. I mean, it's still going to come down to the customer, the consumer, excuse me, the consumer deciding the rate of adoption. Obviously, when you start out, there's going to be a fair amount of buildup, but when we get into 10, 20, 30% of the adoption rate, pricing is going to become more important. Used EVs will help. I think there's a sense of urgency in the utilities that hasn't been there before, and that's really noticeable because typically in the planning stages, you're looking 5, 10, 15 years out, and you put out RFPs and, oh, well, we'll do this study for a couple of years. That, to Wesley's point, they're already putting out RFPs, but everything's compressing as far as the timeline of this, because they're starting to realize that they've got to have a boatload of power. Relatively speaking, the grid's grown at 2% a year. It's not going to be growing at 2% a year in the next 20, 30 years. It's much more than that. And so how you come up with that difference, and coupled with that, fortunately, a lot of the LED lighting that we've been getting for utility savings programs is starting to go away. And so we're starting to try and figure out, okay, what can we replace that with? And then we come back to the idea of having lighting controls as an integral part of building systems to get as much as you can out of the buildings to avoid having to add, new load onto the grid.
And I do agree with that. But we have just squeezed that energy savings so tight now. And yes, there is a huge opportunity for controls, and that's going to help. But I do think that power generation is going to be the solution to this new demand. I don't think we're going to be able to get much more out of energy savings.
And this is another thing that, just came up in the last 2 months, Lawrence Berkeley Lab, which is probably one of the best labs in the country at predicting things. I don't know if it was Wesley or somebody said that they were within a year of saying when LED light bulbs will get to $1, when LED light bulbs were $15. So they've got a good track record of forecasting and projecting whatever. They've got a paper out now under peer review that basically says we think we can get 50% of the coming load out of energy efficiency and demand response and just cleaning up the whole system. So they think there's still a lot left. Whether there is or not, we'll find out.
Okay, Jim Yorgi has a question. Jim, I'm going to unmute your phone if you want to ask.
If you can hear me, I was wondering, there's the new $7,500 federal tax credit. I'm wondering if that has affected the EV vehicle sales at this point.
So I'll take that one. The answer is the federal tax credit that you're speaking of with the $7,500, along with several other federal and state incentive programs out there, are 100% increasing the purchase and procurement of electric vehicles, but it's also supporting the ability to install more electric vehicle charging infrastructure and support grid modernization, and really have it's a catalyst to the entire EV ecosystem. And so it's 100% making a difference, and continuing to fuel, no pun intended, the adoption.
Okay, thank you for that.
That's great, thanks.
And we've got one from an anonymous attendee, and it says, for Peter, can he speak to how electric infrastructure expense may provide a new ROI for deeper retrofits?
Yeah, great question. Up until now, the last 30 years, energy efficiency rebates are basically helping the end user reduce their operating costs. So they save money on their energy bill. I think we're going to see a shift to what's coming is more for the utility to avoid their costs of increasing the complexity of the grid, to not have to pass on that cost to ratepayers. And so it's almost like they're going to have rebate programs available for their own systems internally. Indirectly, it's for everybody, but it's primarily going to be for them. And so it's already starting on the West Coast, where instead of having a system-wide rebate, it's $50 for a troffer across every customer in a service territory for utility, they're picking specific areas where they have load problems now, and they're incentivizing people more in that area because they want to try and get as much power out of that one area so they don't have to upgrade a substation or put in a new one. So I think you're going to see more and more of that happen, and that will increase the value of everything that goes on in a building to reduce that load. That makes sense.
Okay, very good. Okay, do we have one last question? All right, hearing none, we will wrap up. We want to thank our panelists for being with us. I thought it was a great discussion. We thank our audience. Please join us next week on 2 March at the same time for Women in Lighting Plus Design. And we will work hard to edit this video, and it will be available early next week on the NLB website. That's nlb.org. Thank you all.